It is often taught in history classes that the economic boom during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s was due to the adoption of capitalism in Europe. However, while there was a large increase in the global economy in the mid-1800s to late 1900s, this was in large part because of colonization and the exploitation of the working class, both of which are based in capitalistic ideals that have a history of inhumane practices. In fact, this is the primary subject discussed in, bear with me, don't know how to pronounce any of the names, Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o's novel, Devil on the Cross, which takes place in Kenya during the period of British colonization that did not officially end until 1963, lasting nearly half a century. This period resulted in the oppression of Kenyan culture and forced Kenyans into the economic structure of capitalism as it served to benefit the British at this point in time. Essentially, the British saw a nation that did not have technology quite advanced enough to defend itself against them, and settled there as a way to profit off of slave labor. It is through this historical post-colonial lens that Thiong'o makes it clear the various ways that capitalism is an inherently flawed system that was and is continually used as a tool of oppression that drives humans back to their animalistic evolutionary roots. We follow Warenga, a young Kenyan woman who is plagued with odd, disturbing visions and nightmares of the devil, specifically of the devil being crucified only to rise again 3 days later and continue to spread evil and havoc. She has faced tremendous prejudice for being a woman, and after being sexually assaulted and almost raped by her boss, she is fired for refusing his advances. As a result, she tries to kill herself, but is saved by a young university student who hands her a card announcing that there is going to be a devil's feast in Ilmarog, where she grew up. As she travels back to Ilmarog in search of familial support, she meets several other Kenyans on the same journey, many of whom are planning to attend the Devil's Feast. As the story progresses and the group gets to know one another as well as the members of the feast, we see the inherent dangers of capitalism and the ways that this economic system has wreaked havoc on a colonized Kenya. You know what? This is a serious video. Give me a second. I gotta lighten the mood. Oh yeah, my special incense. Oh, sick. Oh, what are we dealing with over here? Oh, we're gonna light this candle. Oh, we gonna light this candle. Oh my god. This flame is really big. Got it. Got it. Beautiful. Would you look at that? Would you look at that? Okay, back to business. As Warenga is traveling to Ilmarog, she finds a matatu to transport her to the village where she wants to go. And on the way, she meets 6 different people. So, as these 6 passengers make their way to Ilmarog, they find common community not only in their language, but in the many maxims and pithy sayings that seem to all be cultural aphorisms or songs that everybody seems to know. In fact, Muturi, a working man who has done many different kinds of jobs throughout his life, claims that, quote, humanity is in turn born of many hands working together. The unity of our sweat is what makes us able to change the laws of nature, able to harness them to the needs of our lives, instead of our lives remaining slaves of the laws of nature. That's why Gikuyu also said change, for the seeds in the gourd are not all of one kind, end quote. In this way, at the heart of Kenyan culture, there is this idea that collective action and a sense of collective responsibility is the only way for a community to truly better itself and become less animalistic. Similarly, it is a culture built on progress toward a more equal, compassionate future for all, as is represented by the idea of change, present in one of their most popular sayings. Thus, this is a people united by one culture, and yet, as they continue toward their destination, we see lines forming between them. Mwara and Mwiri wa Mikirai display that they themselves are aligned with the imperialists' capitalistic ideas. In fact, both gentlemen consistently defend capitalism during the car ride by upholding this view that, quote, there are 2 types of human being in every country, the manager and the managed, the one who grabs and the one who hopes for leftovers, end quote. In this way, imperialism has driven a wedge between the people of Kenya, even the workers who are being exploited, like Mwara, through the use of a capitalist system. Therefore, the common culture is severed by the dogma and divisions created by British imperialism. In fact, this idea of division is only enhanced and built upon as the story continues, and we uncover the ways that capitalism facilitates imperialist regimes like hierarchy and exploitation. When they enter the cave where the feast takes place, one of the first testimonials we hear, starting on page 108 and entitled The Testimony of Gitutu wa Gatanguru, is that of a man who bought land that was stolen from Kenyan people by the British for an incredibly cheap sum. He then divided that land into small sections and sold it back to those displaced people and families for a full 1/2 of the price that he paid for the total 100 acres of land. In this way, a native Kenyan has fully accepted and conformed to capitalism's primary tenet, which is the idea of hierarchical exploitation. Here we see an average person who turned into a rich, well-off person by exploiting the other average working-class people of his community. In this way, capitalism inherently demands the institution of a social hierarchy in which there is one small group of people who hold on to the private property on which everyone must make a living, and who withhold that property in order to accumulate a large quantity of wealth or profit. Thus, while capitalism directly contradicts the collective culture of progress and unity that is foundational to Kenya, it also makes it possible to use, quote, a free market system to rob people of the fruits of freedom, end quote. So then not only is their cultural identity stripped by the economic institution of capitalism, but they are encouraged to enslave one another, to turn against one another at the behest of the British that wish to dominate them. In this way, nobody wins in capitalism. There is no choice other than to exploit others for wealth, and in this way, even the wealthy Kenyans are punished in that they are cogs in an economy designed to devastate their native land and culture. In this way, also, not even the British win, as they are accumulating wealth through inherently unjust and morally corrupt means, thereby giving into an evil that strips the world of compassion and unity. Not only this, but this sort of misdirection and infighting among Kenyans distracts from the true villains in the story, which are the British. The scariest part of this whole story is possibly the insidious nature of capitalism. For during his testimony, Gitutu wa Gatanguru also claims on page 118 that the wealthy have the ability to commodify necessities like air. Quote, when people refused to be robbed or to have their wealth stolen, we'd simply switch off the air until they came to us with hands raised, beseeching us, please steal from us, rob us mercilessly, end quote. To any sane person, this sounds inane. However, if the British are good at anything, it's propaganda. At this juncture, they have removed any choice in how Kenyans run their lives by forcing them to depend on capital or money, which is gained not as a means of exchange, but as a means of accumulating wealth. In fact, in the testimony of Kihahu Wakathika, he claims that, quote, there's nothing on this earth that generates as much profit as people's hunger and thirst for shelter. And so he devises ways to introduce a housing famine by increasing the price of housing to unaffordable levels to create desperation among those with little to give. After this, Gathika's plan is to create poor quality housing that is easily manufactured at prices just affordable enough that the masses will be, quote, saying his prayers, asking heaven to bless the kind-hearted providers who have built him a shelter for his eyes, his ears, his lips, his nose, end quote. So then capitalism removes human rights and choices through the commodification of necessities. The exploitation is physical as well as psychological, as the wealthy claim that they are not enslaving anybody, that in fact they are generously providing shelter for those in need. In fact, in the testimony of Kihahu Wakathika, he claims that, quote, there's nothing on this earth that generates as much profit as people's hunger and thirst for shelter. And so he devises ways to introduce a housing famine by increasing the price of housing to unaffordable levels to create desperation among those with little to give. After this, Gathika's plan is to create poor quality housing that is easily manufactured at prices just affordable enough that the masses will be, quote, saying his prayers, asking heaven to bless the kind-hearted providers who have built him a shelter for his eyes, his ears, his lips, his nose, end quote. So then capitalism removes human rights and choices through the commodification of necessities. The exploitation is physical as well as psychological, as the wealthy claim that they are not enslaving anybody, that in fact they are generously providing shelter for those in need. This sort of misdirection is only enhanced by the manhandling of Christian theology that is then spread by the British throughout Kenya, which often commands, quote, that the slave can never be equal to his master, unquote, and that, quote, it tells the oppressed not to observe the law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, end quote. There are layers to the way that capitalism manipulates the masses into believing it is the only fruitful way to organize a society's economy, and therefore manipulate the organization of the society and the culture within it. In fact, this sense of community is what leads to Waringa's development throughout the story, as by its end she has become a whole new person. This transformation is a direct result of her discussions and relationships with other Kenyans, for it is after the uprising against the members of the Devil's Feast that begins on page 228 that Waringa begins to understand the power of communal revolt against oppression. Quote, "Bring your education to us, and don't turn your backs on the people. That's the only way." End quote. This revolt is what inspires her to change the subdued way she's been living her life, which seems so necessary because of capitalism, and which has continually trapped her in her depression up until this point. For it is after this point in time that Waringa begins to defy imperialism. Quote, "No, I will not proceed at the same pace as before. The seeds in the gourd are not all of one kind, so I will change the pace and manner of my narrative." End quote. In this way, community is what allows us to see truth and love in the world around us. It allows us to slow down and live passionately, humanly, progressively, by reminding us that we can work together, collectively, for the good of society. This all boils down to how dehumanizing capitalism is, and how the British use this aspect of this system to, forgive the pun, capitalize on the despair of a nation that has lost its cultural foundation. This dehumanizing behavior is clearly displayed through Waringa's reaction to her life under capitalism. She's tried to kill herself twice now as a means of escaping the exploitation she's experienced at the hands of the dog-eat-dog world that has been forced onto her by foreigners. We also see the pain that imperialism has caused Gatuiria, in that he cannot connect to his African roots and properly make music that excites and rejuvenates him. Quote, "The way I see it is this: an artistic composition should be inspired by love. Love of your country, a love that inspires the composer to sing hymns of praise to the beauty, the unity, the courage, the maturity, the bravery, the generosity of his country." End quote. The trouble is that capitalism has turned Kenya into a wasteland where love for one's fellow humans is not present, nor as a result is generosity or beauty or unity. We see people separated from their passions, from themselves, and driven to extreme lengths because of the Darwinistic roots of capitalism that ignore what separates humans from beasts, the ability to work together in a sense of unity and empathy for others that allows us to better ourselves as individuals as well as a community. This is what society is, the collective organization of a group of people who work together for the common good. Essentially, change is possible. Finally, the novel finishes by once more displaying the truly deadly and insidious nature of British imperialism and capitalism when Waringa uses a gun, the superior technology brought to Kenya by the British that allowed them to oppress this people in the first place, to murder her oppressor. Once again, this novel declares in no uncertain terms that nobody wins in capitalism. The British's own methods used to subdue insurgency are then used by insurgents to rise up against their oppressors through the unity of community that refuses to simply lay down and die in Kenya. Waringa's development is proof that money does not actually run the world. Our base desires do not have to get the better of us, and we can choose to unify and help one another even in impossible circumstances. A culture divided can come together, and the social hierarchy and propaganda perpetuated by capitalist colonization can be overcome. Truly, it is possible to recapture our humanity through mutual respect and collective action, although it may be difficult to get there.